welcome to Nerdkast episode 13. Tonight we're going to talk about Spider-Man from 2002. Super pumped about that. Directed by Sam Raimi, one of the horror greats. Tonight with me I have Henry, I have Austin, and I have Ryan. And
hello again.
I want to give a shout out to Ryan especially because if you haven't noticed, we've had some pretty awesome thumbnails popping up on our YouTube videos.
I'm wearing a hat, but I'm not taking it off.
Courtesy of this gentleman right here. Do you want to throw out a plug for your artwork and everything, man?
Yes, thank you. You can check my art out at my Instagram at Sushi Robot Illustrations. I think there's like a underscore in between robot and illustrations, but it's my it's where I just post all my art shit, and then all gets like shared to like Facebook and Twitter or Instagram. That's it. I wanted to plug that.
That was Robot Sushi
Robot Illustrations.
Sushi Robot Illustrations. My man does some good work, so peep his work and give him man some props. Facebook, but, Yeah, but thank you for doing our thumbnails. That has been on point. And speaking of thumbnails, we are on Facebook, Twitter, podcasts, everywhere you can find them. Thank you all so much. If you've already been checking out our stuff, it means the world to us. If you can, take a second, like and subscribe on our different social media, and especially YouTube. That'd be awesome. But thank you for listening. And here we go. Henry, first question about Spider-Man. I got it that time. What are your overall thoughts of this film?
Spider-Man does whatever. I will just start out by saying I think this is the best and possibly closest. I mean, every movie has flaws, but I think this movie is the closest to being a flawless superhero origin story because it gave me three things that I think makes a compelling superhero origin story. I think the first is you need to care about the protagonist, and it's more about just getting the powers and adapting to those powers. Like, you need reasons to care about him as an individual. Like, I know I've said that in previous episodes about different movies and characters and stuff, but like, that's the most important thing. And that was always the thing for me about Spider-Man is like, you have to want to see him succeed, but you also want him to like have a strong social life. And that's what made him so easy to relate to, is that it's not just a guy who has these amazing powers that goes out and beats the bad guy. He has to balance his social life. He has to balance his work life. He's trying to be a photographer. He's trying to pursue his dreams. He's trying to take care of his aunt who's alone now. Spoilers. But also, and he's also trying to take that message to heart of what Uncle Ben had said to him, which I think they executed that flawlessly. The second thing I think you need in any superhero origin film is a very good antagonist, like someone that gets you the comic book aspect. Like, I don't know if any of you have seen what was that movie called? The Shadow with freaking Alec Baldwin. Yeah, it's there is that movie alone, I think, and kind of embodies a lot of the cheesy like superhero movies we were getting out of the 90s where the villains weren't necessarily memorable. Willem Dafoe, flawless as a Green Goblin. I think he's absolutely amazing. I think and at the same time, you also feel for Norman Osborn. You feel like he's struggling to find his place in the world and everything that he's got going on. So when the conflict actually happens, there's almost this part of you that, of course, we're rooting for Spider-Man, but you sympathize a lot with Norman Osborn because of the way he was being treated at his company. And the third thing I think that is most important is you have to see the conflict. And I think what I mean by that is there are some movies where you see someone who's basically just God tier from the second they inherit their powers, and it's like nothing can stop them. You never really feel like there's a real threat. That's kind of how I felt like when I saw the first two Iron Man movies. Like, I know Tony Stark takes damage, but like at the end, it's just like nothing's going to touch him. He's still going to be like overseeingly arrogant. That was something that like I wish I could have seen more. We see it more in Iron Man 3, where he starts having PTSD from New York City and stuff like that. But in this movie, you see Peter Parker struggle every step of the way. And that's just, I think, the pinnacle of his suffering, other than Uncle Ben dying was definitely the scene where he realizes that even though he didn't directly kill Norman Osborn at the end, he still had to watch him die. And he's like, how the hell am I supposed to explain this to Harry? Now my best friend's going to have to go through this. I know I can't be with Mary Jane, even though I finally have the opportunity to be with her. It's just so many things going on, but no matter what, he always does the right thing.
Peter Parker certainly going through a lot of heavy, heavy stakes that the audience, or at least this audience member, felt the entire way through. Austin, what about you, man? What are your overall thoughts of the film?
All right, so I got to talk briefly about my history just with superhero films overall. That way, like, people listening and you guys as well can kind of see where I'm coming from. So superhero movies notoriously are like not my thing. Like, I've never really vibed. I hate using that word so much, but I've never really vibed with superhero films because to me, a hero really needs to be like grounded and normal and like an everyday man. However, the movie I think has really changed my opinion of like superhero movies going forward, not only watching them for my own enjoyment, but for Nerdkast as well. Because I'm not going to lie, I think this is probably in my top 10 favorite movies. I saw this maybe briefly, like little moments of this movie when I was a kid when this came out. I was like 7 years old when this came out. I remember my grandmother rented it from the library on tape because, you know, we were that old. And all I could remember was the first fight scene between Green Goblin and Spider-Man at the parade at the was it a parade?
Yeah,
this movie's so fresh in my mind. Yeah,
The Macy's.
This movie is so fresh in my mind.
Not the
It's like the
Macy's
first time watching it.
Macy Gray was playing, but is it the Macy's Day Parade?
I said the Macy Gray Parade.
It's the Macy Gray Parade.
She owned that shit, and he just shit all over it.
Just immediately dates the movie.
Ow.
You know,
Remember,
like
I was told by Jen.
that scene sticking so well in my head after all these years, coming back to it with like a really fresh take on this movie. I was like, man, I know I'm like really in for something special because I don't remember anything else about this movie whatsoever up until watching it yesterday. So that first fight scene where like Spider-Man is just running and he's like, Peter Parker just like does the whole like Superman tear away the shirt and like there's his vest and it's just like, oh, here we go. Yeah. And you know, this movie all in all was just so exciting to watch. You know, and completely in the honest opinion, like I wasn't really buying Tobey Maguire's performance as Peter Parker, but then I started to accept that, you know, like this guy is a loser. Like he's a nerd. Like you learn to accept that the performance is going to be awkward, you know, it not in a really like campy way. Like, no, like Peter Parker is a loser. He's a dork, you know? And eventually by the end of the movie, I was just completely on his side. I was all for Tobey Maguire's acting. I was all for Peter Parker. Just like, I know he's going to, you know, win at the end of the day because like, you know, we got a trilogy out of Tobey Maguire. And it's just, some of these scenes are laughably good. Some of them are really brutal. Like this could be a really like intense movie at times. And again, I don't really have a way to base this on like other movies because I haven't seen them. These are all new movies to me. But it's just kind of like, God, I love these one-on-one fights just between good and evil. And just, you know, the hero wins at the end of the day, which is great. And I won't say all my thoughts right away, but you know, like,
hey, fair enough.
Just to start this one out there, like, God, what a movie this was. I am obsessing over it.
That's a great thing to hear. Ryan, tossing it to you.
So I'm actually going to pick up off something that both Henry and Austin touched upon. There's a reason why, Henry, it felt so pulpy. Is because like, you know, like you mentioned The Shadow, you know, there's movies like in the 90s, like The Shadow, Phantom,
Billy Zane,
Darkman, all these, which I believe is a Raimi. Is Darkman Raimi? I believe Darkman.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, there's a reason why they have that feel to us, because those were pulp comics, and Spider-Man is it was on like my first exposure to Spider-Man is like in the newspaper and the funnies, and seeing like, just a strip of him and like Hydro Man in the same panel was really cool. So, and it was, love at first sight. And something, Austin, that you mentioned Superman. There's I have this whole theory that Spider-Man is the perfect amalgamation of Batman and Superman. That everything from the red and blue color scheme, being the main motif, his locomotion. He doesn't fly necessarily; he swings, but it's air. It's an aerial locomotion. He's his tactics. He uses not only like stealth and kind of fear based. What's also scary besides bats, snakes, spiders, rats, spiders. So, the whole web, like, coming down from the ceiling and snatching people up, that's a Spider-Man move too. Even down to the video game, the combat in that, do you want to know where that actually came from? Spider-Man. The Spider-Man, the movie, the video game. That's, dodge to, the spider sense goes, you press triangle to dodge, and then you counter with like a jump back at them with circle or square, whatever, he's Batman and Superman. So, it's kind of like a combination of like the Richard Donner Superman movies where, it's very serial and pulpy, especially when, JJJ gets introduced, like the spinning, newspaper, and the montage when Peter Parker first becomes Spider-Man. It's like he puts on the mask and he swings off and whatnot. It's very much such, I think, such an homage to like those old Chris Reeve Superman movies, and even like the Tim Burton Batman movies, in a sense. Not so much in the Tim Burton is way leans more into the camp, where Sam Raimi, with his whole horror, that's like kind of a different kind of camp, but it's still camp nonetheless. So I know someone brought it up. I think
Evil Dead is super campy. You're right.
Yeah.
Darkman. Yeah.
Right. But it's a different kind of camp compared to like, sure, Tim Burton, which is,
this is very like Tim Burton specific.
Gothic. It's very, where Tim Burton's more gothic, Sam Raimi's more visceral gore. It's like power violence versus Cradle of Filth or something.
Yeah. I totally follow that. Hey, you're right. I mean, to that point, besides Blade and I want to say the first X-Men movie, the only other really good superhero movies, like really good ones, were 78 Superman, whenever Superman 2 came out, and then some would argue both the first and second. I certainly would, Batman, Tim Burton movies, but
I think those
certainly
don't
the first
age very
one.
Well.
They don't. They're very of a time.
Batman, but I think that they don't age very well. While these Raimi movies, I think they hold up like pretty well. The CGI,
I would agree.
So much. There's lots of rubber Peter Parker.
I would go back a little farther to say, sorry to interrupt you, Ryan, that this is completely biased opinion of my own, but I said I don't vibe with superhero movies, and I do mean that. But I have always loved Batman. And oh my God, Batman, the movie with Adam West, is still one of the most entertaining movies you could ever watch.
And once again, a different kind of camp, but camp nonetheless. And like camp can be timeless. And this is the kind of camp that is, I think, timeless.
It's of the tasty variety and the palatable type of camp. There is some camp you absolutely are right that there's like, not for me. Go ahead, Henry. Sorry.
Is this like, I think that's what's wonderful was like camp is not too far away from cult, as in cult classic. And like, I think that's also what makes a movie, like, for example, The Goonies. Some people, like even myself, was like, some of my favorite films are like those 1980s, like group bunch films, but like a movie like The Goonies and then The Outsiders and then The Breakfast Club, which is like, they're all three very different films, but they all came around the same time and they all had that friendship thing going on, which is why like you see a movie like or a TV show like Stranger Things. Like I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's like when I see Stranger Things, I think The Goonies and The Outsiders and all that, because of that 80s big like
homages
group
to those
exactly
things,
Well, so I'm going to wrap up this section real quick. Just my quick thoughts on it, because I'm sure we're going to really get super into it. But I really like the whole movie, and I've tried several times to sit down and pick apart this movie, and I have a really, really hard time doing it. And I don't think it's just because of nostalgia reasons. I think it's because this movie's like actually really, really solid throughout.
You got to learn to kill your children. You got to learn to kill them. You drown them in the river. You know.
I think it's been touched on a lot.
Rip it apart. Spider-Man can take it. You can.
I try. But the performances are so good. The story is amazing. Like the writing, I really enjoy the writing. I think it's pretty clever in certain parts. And then Sam Raimi just kind of, this is a pretty scary movie if you're a little kid. Like I saw it in theaters at the age of 12, and there were parts of it where it's like the jump scares and stuff.
When they get atomized on the balcony.
Oh yeah. There's like, did they just disintegrate?
Oh my God, I did not see that coming. Again,
that's how you know it's Sam Raimi.
That's dark.
Is that a nod to Evil Dead?
No, but
I thought
I think that's him being added some dark humor in there, or
I definitely got like Mars Attacks. I think it's Mars Attacks.
That's Tim Burton, but
the alien.
I guess I can't. They got a similar thing.
They're definitely camp counselors at that camp.
Yeah,
they all work there.
They all learn at the same school.
So in the vein of trying to like find flaws in the film, Austin, is there anything about it that might not sit with you as much as you'd like it to?
As someone who doesn't watch this movie through nostalgia goggles or anything, like you just touched on it, you try to dissect this movie and find things wrong with it. Again, I know I mentioned it, like at first I didn't really appreciate Tobey Maguire's performance. It was kind of awkward in like the cute awkward kind of way, but it's kind of like I feel like this is off somehow.
Well, because he's like a 28-year-old, 18-year-old.
That was a little, like he's definitely playing a younger character, but I was like, I could tell you're like a little out of your age range for this character. But by the end of the movie, I was just so happy for Peter Parker. Like he's this kid who is a loser, and like you want so bad for something to go right. You want him to get Mary Jane. You want him to avenge Uncle Ben. You want him to stop the Green Goblin, and like he does all of these things successfully. But again, just trying to pick apart this movie again from the first time I watched it yesterday, I'm like, is there things I can really say like this is inherently bad about this movie? As someone who is not really turned on by superhero movies, it's kind of like, I don't know. Like I'd have to watch this a few more times and like get back to you. It's an enjoyable movie. That's why it's going straight to the top on like my favorite movies of all time.
It's certainly a testament to how good the movie is when like people who might not have like lived and breathed it for so long are like, yeah, this is pretty dope. I like it, even though it's almost 20 years old at this point, which is insane already.
Right.
Ryan,
and you mentioned, you mentioned the writing. And one thing I really noticed was that the writing is so consistent. Like lines are brought back throughout the movie.
And I had to look his name up. David Koepp did the screenplay for this, and shout out to David Koepp.
For real, like round of applause. It's like the lines where it's like, don't tell Harry. It's like you get that from Osborn, you get that from Mary Jane. It's like, God bless you, Peter Parker. You get it from, Harry, you get it from Norman. It's just like all these repeated lines of dialogue, and they all have like different meanings to Peter Parker. Is just like the consistency is just, it's perfect. I'm just gonna gush about the movie because like I don't have anything bad to say about it.
Nope, it happened. Prepare for the gush to flow. Ryan, any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I mean, I have so much nostalgia with this, like everyone else does, but like, I
not true, sir.
I freaking love true. But I love
sustained.
Things that I think probably could have been, worked out a little bit better. He's like I said, a 30-year-old playing a teenager is something, but like, that was during a time where that was what they did, like Smallville, those are all, late, mid to late 20s, playing teenagers, like Tom Wellington is like, was probably like mid to late 20s, probably like 28 years old playing, 16-year-old Clark Kent, 17-year-old Clark Kent, whatever. Oh, dang it. I had something while Austin was talking, and then gosh dang, I forgot what it was.
Pop back in when you remember, because I'm very curious. It's kind of funny because you were definitely of the more critical minded in terms of like what makes a movie.
Yeah, and it was a
structurally
good. It was like, that kind of doesn't really work out. Oh man, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was something about the beginning of it.
Well, Henry, bail him out real quick.
What
anything that you would like to see better, and any ideas on how it could have been better?
Well, one thing, and this isn't a flaw that I have, but it's something I want to address because I hear a lot of other people talk about it as time goes on. And it's one of those things that I literally never heard this complaint until like more than a decade after the film was out. And I was just like, what? And it's like, I love people complaining that the Green Goblin costume was like the kabuki like mask and it wasn't like the actual like movable face. And they compared it to like being a Power Ranger, which I'm like, I don't know. Like, I think the costume is dope. Like, I remember as a kid, I was like, that is an awesome looking villain costume. But also at the time, we didn't have a lot of great movie villains in superhero films. Like, the closest thing you have are the Batman villains. And I think Spider-Man, like, whereas like Batman secularly has the best villains in DC, Spider-Man secularly has the best villains in Marvel, not because they're the most powerful or anything, but because they're the most interesting. They can be adapted in most ways. And like one other thing that, once again, like I've heard other people complain about, but I totally don't agree with at all, is that where like we see like the Batman films, for example, as time goes on, they get darker and darker and darker and darker. Spider-Man was the complete opposite. They started off dark, and as time has gone on, they've only gotten lighter and lighter and lighter. Like we go all the way now to like the Tom Holland like Homecoming, where like really the only scene where like I really felt like was even remotely dark is when he's like crying and looking at himself in the water or whatever. But like this film, there were so many moments where like you really felt like it was him versus the world, and just that feeling of like, it goes back to like the Harry Potter movies where you see this kid that is completely on his own, that it feels like the world's against him, but he's still doing the right thing anyway. So where I've heard people complain that this movie was way too dark, I completely disagree.
Yeah, no,
okay.
I was going to bring up the costume thing. It is something I would have been curious to see an alternate design potentially. But in hindsight, I mean, that was something that kind of even occurred to me many years later. So at the time of watching this, and for many years, it didn't even bother me. But I think back to like what you're talking about, it's like practical effects and CGI and stuff. Like, I don't know if a giant CGI suckfest at the end of this movie would have been the right way to end it. I kind of like how gritty and in your face and like you feel brutal. You feel the punches, and I don't know if like just a CGI-ass costume or something that was like goofy with just, because it's basically just a purple beanie. And he's got like a purple suit on or something, and his skin turns green. But
Mr. Clutie, I remember what my answer was.
Take it away, my son.
So it was I was about to talk about the costume. So one of the things that kind of doesn't really track because it's talked about and said, but not really set up, is how he makes his costume, how supposedly, 17, 18-year-old Peter Parker has the know-how to make a costume, like the one that right behind you, the one that's right behind you, Spencer, how he was able to make that on his own. I know that he's supposed to be, a nerdy, like genius kid and whatnot. But in the Sam Raimi movies, we don't really see that he's a genius. besides like, answering a question, but that's in like the second one or whatever. It's just said that
kind of a scientist,
and then he's
myself.
treated like a nerd. He's just treated like garbage, and then said that talked about that he's a science whiz and whatnot. We don't actually see him be a science whiz, unlike Andrew Garfield ones, which that I got to give up props to. The Amazing Spider-Man is that you actually see him make his web shooters. The advent of the organic shooter at the time was genius, because like in the comics that was, I think, maybe touched upon very slightly, where I think Peter Parker started mutating more into like an actual spider, like he started growing like other arms and whatnot, but that because like his spider like genes were like overriding his human genes or something like that. So that was like, I think, like really the only time organic webbing was really an option for Peter Parker. But this is the first time we had ever seen Peter Parker with organic webbing, and was kind of like a game changer. But it also takes away from his what made Peter Parker, and that is his ingenuity. Is that not only is he a really good chemist, he's also a really good engineer. He's also a really good physicist. With physics, does with physics. That's
physicist. Yep.
Yeah. He, because his momentum and whatnot, he's able to calculate the how much momentum he needs in order to complete the arc or whatever. He doesn't just like randomly swing a web and just like jolt pull himself. Like all of those are calculated things, and that's sans the spider powers. Like he's that good at it. He's like like an eidetic memory of math or something. It's ridiculous. He's really, really smart, really up there in terms of like his IQ, like up with like Reed Richards and Tony Stark and whatnot. But you don't really... Yeah, what up?
No, just quick response to the costume. This was just one of the things, like I actually had that exact same question about like, how did he make the costume as a kid? Mm-hmm.
And actually, I will follow up to what you said about the movies getting progressively lighter, because it's actually not. They get progressively darker. They try so hard to follow the Batman formula with like the Amazing Spider-Man and whatnot. It's not until Homecoming does it get like light again. Like they try.
Well, those were mainly the films I was referencing, or like the MCU ones.
Right. But, yeah. In that aspect, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's funny when you mentioned the costumes, like, because when I was a kid, I remember like just like asking myself, like, how do you make the costume? And then the way I kind of always self-justified it was that, so, I mean, I'm sure some of you have been to these cons like Comic-Con or KetsuCon or Otakon, where it's like you see these kids who literally make these insane costumes out of like cardboard boxes and silk and random fabrics and stuff that look almost movie-like. And I'm just like, if they can do it and they're not super like otherworld like geniuses, then maybe Peter Parker could do it in his room.
Right. But I mean, the only thing is that it's not really set up. I mean, it's kind of lightly touched upon with that, his, the makeshift suit that he wrestles in. That's really just like a balaclava and then a paintball jersey or something like that, that just happened to either he's, it's a red sweater that he spray painted and all that. But like, dude, the suit is so intricate. The raised webbing, the reflective lenses, the brick pattern that's in like the red and the blue, it's so intricate. The Mark Webb, Amazing Spider-Man ones is another one that it's like the suit is also a little too nice for. It makes a little more sense because I don't think that one has raised webbing, and it looks like there's like a zipper. I think like that one might actually be pieces, because this one's also pieces too, because he actually takes his boots off and whatnot. But it feels so intricate, But also, this is in my opinion, an homage to like those Superman movies. So it's like he's Spider-Man. Shut up, all right?
Yeah, and they give us a montage. They're like, here, deal with it.
Yeah.
Well, like even from like a fresh set of eyes, watching this, I didn't feel it was really. It wasn't something I was wanting to see. Really, was like the creation of the suit itself, like the actual like manufacturing of it. I appreciated like the montage we got of like, you know, trying to design it where he's like, no, it needs more of this or it needs less of this. No, don't do this. And I think because I've seen bits and pieces of like other superhero movies, I think in a post Iron Man world, that's kind of what we want, or it's what people want, I guess, from a superhero movie. It's just like, well, now I need to know how you actually made the suit. Where before people then it was just
how you work, you know,
right? But like, and I think like, because correct me if I'm wrong, I think like the first Iron Man movie, what little I know of it, is like a lot of that movie is him designing his suit. So like that's why I'm saying it could be a hot take or an unpopular opinion, but like I feel like in a post Iron Man world, that's what kind of people not really obsessed with.
At the very end, you become the Spider. I'm the Spider,
right? And I understand
flash of the red and blue at the end.
But it's kind of like taking it back to like older Batman movies. It's just like the suit was already there, and I guess at least in my opinion, like from my perspective, I just accept that like the suit has either already been made or like throughout the course of the movie, it's just been made. I don't know. It doesn't fascinate me to like see how the
I'm just being nitpicky, you know. I'm just like.
Sure.
Since I was a little kid, I was like, how the fuck did he, how come I can't do that? And it turns out you can do it if you just spend a lot of time and, you know, practice and get really good at sewing and whatnot. But I call shenanigans on Peter Parker being able to make a suit of that caliber that easily.
Don't get me wrong, I totally sat there as a 6th or 7th grader like, how the hell did he do that? Like that is amazing.
Always wanted that suit.
This is probably still my favorite Spider-Man suit of all the live action ones. I still think this might be the best.
Mine is Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's the worst Spider-Man movie, but I think it's the best suit. I think just everything down to the eyes. I don't think it's raised webbing. But yeah, it's like, it's so good. He looks like the ultimate Spider-Man, which is who he's supposed to be, even though it's titled The Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah. Well, great conversation. I think we pretty much hit all the things that I would even like sit here and strain myself to think about. I've even ever heard brought up about this movie in like a negative light, but that I think that covers it just about.
You missed a great conversation.
You can fill me in later. It's cool.
You'll see it in the edit.
All right, Ryan, I'm coming to you. The question is, how did you like the love triangle relationship between Peter, Harry, and MJ?
So I know it's like part of the story and whatnot, but I hate it. It's just the worst part of the whole story, and it's the worst part of 3. You know, it's even worse than Venom. Is the love triangle, you know.
I wouldn't go that far.
I hate love triangles, and that's just from me being a dumb boy with a dumb boy lizard brain. I think it gets in the way of the fights. I just want to see Spider-Man fight bad guys, you know. But I get Spider-Man. I get it. It's a good plot point for, you know, a Spider-Man story, you know, the love triangle, whatnot. And I think they do a good job of executing that. You know, James Franco is Harry Osborn and will be Harry Osborn in my eyes until the day he dies. You know, I and Kirsten Dunst will always be MJ, will always be Mary Jane Watson in my mind. Zendaya does a good job, you know, but she's like MJ, you know, while Kirsten Dunst is Mary Jane. It's such a, I don't know, you know, it's cool. I'm cool with it. It gets, you know, it facilitates the story. But like I said, I'm not a big fan of love triangles, especially getting in the way of my boy Spider-Man, you know. Although Harry, I don't know why she even picks Harry or Peter at all, because Harry's like, he's rich, he's hot, you know. Have you see his apartment, like where he lives, and then the apartment that his dad gets him and Peter and whatnot. I don't know why, like, she doesn't try to wife up Harry.
Well, I'll touch on that.
I do have a response.
She's like, come on, you got that Osborne money. What are you doing?
I'll touch on that.
The only reason why Peter gets a shot with Mary Jane is because he's a superhero. The only reason why.
I disagree.
I disagree as well.
Before I toss, hold on. Before settle down, ladies.
yeah, of course. Yeah, she's always had a crush on him and whatnot. You know, like
I gotta be like Whoopi on The View. I just gotta be like, shut up.
Grew up together. The girl next door, boy next door, whatever bullshit, dude. Mary Jane, you want to be an actress? You want to be an actress? Being with Peter means you work at that diner. You know, like, and does that happen in
so Harry, here's my response to that, and then I'm gonna pass it on.
She sticks with John Jameson, the astronaut. Why is she messing around with this broke ass superhero?
So
you better have like a big old spider dong.
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is she was obviously mistreated horribly by her family, and there's a lot of drama and screaming, and like there's multiple scenes of her dad just like being a total asshole and a drunk and everything. And Peter, like, so here's also my full answer for this question while I'm at it. Peter, I like the relationship triangle only because I like how much conflict it gives all of them, and it kind of like there's a lot of like mystique around what's going on because there's always secrets, and that just is interesting to me. But Peter, like, he has this like childhood crush on her and everything, and then but she's not really like aware of that, I guess. She's like, oh, he's just that kid I've known my whole life or whatever. So then she, you know, Harry makes a move and she falls on him, but then Harry like mistreats her at that Thanksgiving, and she's like, nope, I'm not gonna marry or even be involved with somebody who's like disrespecting me like this. But it was harder for me to understand as a kid why Peter Parker at the end of the movie can't be with Mary Jane, but in this one I kind of understand more. Like now being a little bit older, like he was so worried that people close to him, because she did get in trouble because Osborn found out about him, and same thing with like Aunt May and everything. So he was just like, you know, at the end he's like, I just can't be with you, and you know, at that point Harry's all pissed off. But I enjoy, but to that specific point of like, well, why didn't she just go with him? It's like because she saw he was an asshole and she wanted.
Well, I mean, they're also still kids at that moment in time. You know,
this is true. This is very true.
They just graduated high school. Remember that they just graduated high school, and they were freshmen at like Empire State. You know, ESU, I believe that's the Marvel equivalent of NYU. So, you know, like, of course he's going to be like a little shit asshole. I mean, also look who raised him. He's a product of his dad, you know, like
very neglected,
who is now also poisoning himself with goblin serum. So, you know, he's not giving out the best advice anyway. So, you know, like, you got to forgive Harry. You know, he's not coming from like a good place. However, that doesn't forgive her when they get older, you know, and she's really, come on, you know, this dude's all about, you know, if I was Mary Jane, my last name would be Osborn after the second movie.
Yeah, I'll have to look back at that when I rewatch the second movie. It's been a little while, but this one specifically, I kind of like how it all ends up for all of them. And yeah, Henry, what are your thoughts on the triangle?
Well, I mean, you know, what's funny about like even thinking about the triangle, like it's difficult to just like think this movie alone and like just let that be it. And then, of course, the second, because like the third one, just the roadmap. And what I'll appreciate about this trilogy is they did have a roadmap. They didn't Star Wars sequel trilogy this. Like there was a roadmap, and the constant was that Peter never really gets everything that he wants. It's always like on the rocks. Like I know they kind of ended it on that cliffhanger of him and Mary Jane being together. And you kind of look at it and it's just like, is that just Harry or Peter's life? Is like, is it always just her like slipping away, like, and then coming back and then slipping away and coming back? But anyways, for this movie alone, like, of course, like as a fan and just being like, I want Mary Jane to be with Peter. Like I can understand why they did it. Cause it's like, you know, she's the hot girl that every dude wants her. Every dude. We wanted Kirsten Dunst when we were kids watching this movie. It was like when you first see Harry Potter and Emma Watson said first a kid, but then she grows up and you're like, wait a minute, we're the same age. But No, like even like looking, I think she starts with like Flash Thompson, which, you know, classic high school bully, like gets the hot girl, you know, and then he's the asshole. She then goes to Harry, which is like kind of the middle ground between where Peter and Flash Thompson is. Now, I will say though, like, I think that Harry is inherently, like, just by nature, I think he's a good guy. I think that was well demonstrated throughout all three movies. I think
He's a good friend.
He is, like, I think the only thing that was ever wrong about Harry was that when it finally came time to avenge his father, like, it was just kind of seeing the truth. I know, granted, that could have been executed so much better instead of the butler being like, "Well, it's time for me to tell you the truth."
That is like the dumbest part of the Spider-Man trilogy is Harry's grudge against Spider-Man. Yeah, it's good for him. It's good for story for him to have a grudge, but for that particular reason, like, if it was done any other way, like, it's so easy for him to see that, like, he was stabbed by his own glider, which, you know, is paralleled in the third one. You know, like, there's a whole thing. There's a whole thing about the Raimi trilogy and Spider-Man and his villains, how he doesn't actually kill any of them except for Venom, and that was the one that Sam Raimi hated. Is Venom. Well, he hates Venom.
but even like looking at just Harry as a character,
they hardcore like, kill Venom. You see him evaporate.
They do. But like, even like just looking at like Harry as an individual, just in this movie alone, before we go to the later movies and different episodes, like I think that like they demonstrated that Harry was always a good guy and he did care for Mary Jane. I just think he kind of liked her for the wrong reasons, like where he had that little bit of Flash Thompson in him that was like, I see this hot girl and I want her, just like every other dude. Where Peter, like, kind of like what Spencer said, where it's just like he saw her for who she was. Like, he had his intentions, I think, were always pure. I don't think he was always looking at her as like, man, I want to tap that. I think he actually cared about her hopes and dreams and aspirations. And it's even demonstrated where she reveals to Peter that she's working at the diner and she's just like, oh yeah, don't tell Harry. So she can't even be fully honest with Harry, but she can be fully honest with Peter, which is why another reason I think she gets with him. And last thing I'll say before we move on, like, I think Spencer also touched on it where, like, yeah, her dad's mean to her. Like, guys are really, like, they're dicks to her. Like, even the whole Flash Thompson thing where they break up at the graduation. He's like, man, whatever. Like, I could do so much better. Whatever he says, it's kind of off in the distance. But, like, yeah, and Harry kind of does it a little bit at Thanksgiving. And it's just, you know, did he ever like her for the right reasons? I think Peter was the only one who was actually like pure in his intentions with her. And I think that's why ultimately she just kept coming back to him. She just, as we see in the next movie, she just got tired of waiting.
Well, before I toss it to Austin, the one thing I'll bring up is like, it is interesting how Harry knew that Peter had a thing for her and he still made his move. And that was like an interesting point of like kind of awkwardness and stuff. It's like, hey guy, like I'm dating her now and I know you love her, but this will end well. Like, Austin, what are your thoughts on the love triangle?
Well, the reason it works so well is thanks to the ending scene at Uncle Ben's grave, where he doesn't get Mary Jane. As badly as you want them to end up together, you know, Peter Parker does make the mature, selfless decision of like, yes, I will always be there and I will always protect you, but, you know, I can't love you because then I expose you to all this sort of danger.
Which now, is, I think, another dumb thing, you know, that is so passe, and I'm glad that they did away with that in The Amazing Spider-Man. I think it's much safer for them to know that he's Spider-Man. That way they can protect themselves, you know. Aunt May didn't know that he was Spider-Man. His enemy found out. Aunt May was unprepared when she got bum rushed, you know, by the Green Goblin. You know, he doesn't need to tell Norman. He needs to tell Aunt May. You know,
I think, but
hey kids, if you're Spider-Man, tell your mom. Okay.
I think even with preparation, despite all of that, it's still putting the people he loves in danger. So I think
he's putting the people he loves in danger by being negligent and not informing them that he is around danger and danger follows him. If I inform you that I carry a gun on me at all times, are you wary of my presence?
No, but the way to get to, Peter Parker is through the heart. And who does he love most? He loves.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, that's the whole. That's the whole. Dialogue
but that's why he didn't at the very end unmask himself and go, "I am Iron Man." Just tell Aunt May. Tell Aunt May that you're Spider-Man. That way, when you're coming and going, she's not worried, sick. That when she goes up into your room and sees that you're not there in the middle of the night. That's the only thing that I wish that he did. And Aunt May, of course, knew the entire time. It's not really said. Of course she knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. She lives in his house. Your mom knows.
Well, I know that from Marvel Spider-Man, like PS4, that like Aunt May knows, but I don't know it from this yet because I haven't seen the entire trilogy.
That's like a comic thing too.
Yeah, but I still think keeping your identity a secret from ever being exposed is the best way to protect those you love. I think the ones that he loves end up just kind of like forcing their way into Spider-Man's conflicts, and that's how they end up
because they keep wondering what's going on with him, and he's not telling them, so they force their way in. If he had told them, they could keep their distance.
Mind if I hop in real quick just to make one thing? I saw Spencer was opening his mouth. I just want to throw in something real quick to kind of like pull a Harry Osborn in the final scene of Spider-Man 3. For those who haven't seen it, it's basically Spider-Man's about to die, then all of a sudden Harry Osborn shows up and saves him from Sandman and Venom, which is what I want to do with Austin right here. So I got your back, bro, on this because the story aspect of the one, and it said once again, I think Ryan actually said it, where you hear something like "Thank God for you, Peter." It said over and over and over again. It's that Sam Raimi thing. They do it again with the ones I love will always be the ones who pay. They never really hit on that aspect in many superhero movies, unless you mean the one scene where "Hey, I have your girlfriend. You must do what I say." But they really hit hard on it in this film in particular. And I think what makes this movie stand out above the rest is that literally for the few people that were close to Peter, every single one of them suffered immensely between even Norman Osborn and potentially losing his company, kind of losing Harry, his feud with Spider-Man, all those things. Then he loses his life. Then Harry loses a father. He loses his love interest. And to a degree, he doesn't lose Peter, but he does become a little distant in the next one. And you can see it. And he's like, "Well, why aren't you showing me Spider-Man?" He's like, I can't show you Spider-Man because it's me. And I think that's why they just kept reiterating on that. The ones I love will always be the ones who pay. And so I understand his thought process in that moment. And because, he is still a kid. The character, not Tobey Maguire, but the character is still a kid. And I think to a kid that would make sense. Now, maybe if you tell somebody, like Ryan was saying, I think that kind of wisdom would probably come with age and maturity, but this is still year one Spider-Man.
Well, my retort to that is that his biggest lesson that he learned when the whole thing about Spider-Man, great power comes great responsibility. That's Uncle Ben gets shot and whatnot. What was he doing when Uncle Ben, was out and about walking around,
wrestling,
getting shot? He was wrestling. What did he tell Uncle Ben that he was doing?
At the library.
Studying at the library. So he lies to Uncle Ben. He doesn't tell him the truth. He doesn't tell him what's actually going on with him. That has the direct result of Uncle Ben getting shot, because Uncle Ben is walking around, not looking for Peter, but was he's at the library really late. I'm gonna bum around and wait for him or something like that, or I'm here to pick him up and he's taking too long. So because Peter lied to him, didn't tell him where he was not at the place that he was supposed to be, results in his biggest lesson that he ever learned: with great power comes great responsibility. And he goes, and that's his whole thing. The real lesson that he should have learned was tell your parents where you're going. If he had told Ben that he was going to wrestle at that place and earn some money, whatnot, Ben would have gone there instead of to where he supposedly thought he was going to meet Peter and get shot, intervene at that robbery or whatever, that, he doesn't learn the right lesson, and that affects him for the entire trilogy. He doesn't tell Aunt May that he's Spider-Man, so she gets messed up by Green Goblin or whatnot, but that's not a direct result. She wasn't really able to. She would have been. There's so many variables that could have happened, if she was informed of what was going on. Like, it's like being a cop, like and being undercover. You tell your wife you're going undercover, that you're not going to be there for a couple days or however long, like you have to tell your home base what's going on, or else they're going to go looking for you and they're going to get hurt. You want to know who doesn't get hurt in these movies, but besides the fact that they intervene, but they're at least aware of Happy Hogan, Pepper Potts, they intervene because, they got armor or whatever, because they're trying to help Tony and whatnot, but they're aware of what's going on and they make the conscious decision to help. Spider-Man strips away their choice of safety. He takes it upon himself. Yeah, because he's a child and whatnot, but that's the first lesson that he learned, the first lesson that life gives him. And he learns the wrong thing. He learns that I need to hide these things from people because people are going to get hurt, or whatnot.
I think it's also
which
really
is
interesting.
and which further propagates the issue.
Well, I think it's really interesting.
And she doesn't find
when you think about it, like in the terms of like even learning a lesson, like it just goes back to the whole aspect of, like, not to quote The Last Jedi, because I still think it's the worst movie in cinematic history. But when you have, failure is the greatest teacher of them all. Like, when shit went down with Uncle Ben dying, he took it as, this is my fault because of my choices. And like, you just have to think, like, even when you're in that mindset, like, I agree, like there is a lesson to be learned.
What did he tell Aunt May? What did he tell Aunt May when he got home? Uncle Ben is dead. Or Uncle Ben, where were you? I was studying at the library. Mm-hmm. So he continued to lie to her.
Well, he does confess in Spider-Man 2. He does confess, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, but we're not on Spider-Man 2. We're on Spider-Man 1.
Yeah. I know, but also,
does he confess in Spider-Man that he could have stopped him, or was that in 3?
No, it's in 2.
Oh, this is the real guy, and I could have stopped him, or
that whole thing was stupid. Yeah, we all know it was stupid.
Yeah, like
I'm gonna wrap up this section real quick with a couple things.
It's a whole thing. It's my biggest thing about Spider-Man is his whole hiding his identity. I hate it.
Just to keep the ship going, Austin. I'm gonna hard cut right here. What I'm gonna say is, I think a little bit of what everybody's saying is right, and that's not just to play like the moderator here or anything, but I think. Yes, I think objectively couch quarterbacking the situation, probably telling everybody is the best thing to do objectively, because a lot of other similar shows and stuff.
Not everybody, just people he lives with.
The relevant people.
Mary Jane doesn't need to know, but Aunt May does.
But I think I like the fact that he struggles with what the right thing to do is constantly. I think it makes for a more interesting story, and I think it his choices seem to have more weight, because it's like, they don't know what they're getting into when they're just like out and about with him, and suddenly shit goes down and he's Spider-Man, and it's like, so I could probably go down the rabbit hole as well, but just to keep us moving right along, Henry, do you like Willem Dafoe's performance as Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin?
Absolutely. Willem Dafoe is the Green Goblin, and you cannot convince me otherwise. Like, he was
formula.
He is so good as a villain, and it's one of those things, like, you have to go back to that time where we didn't see a lot of superhero movies in general. Like, you would think the 4 Batman ones, which is Batman 1989 through Batman and Robin, and then of course like Superman 1 and 2, and then like Blade 2, and I can't remember if this became before X-Men or X-Men became after
the first X-Men came in 2000. This is 2002, so
2002. Okay, yeah. So, and even then though, like we saw like Ian McKellen as Magneto, great performance, and same like as Ray Park as Toad, and like the girl playing Mystique and Sabretooth and all that. But it's like, you know, to have like presence, I think that's what makes like the Joker, for example, such an amazing character. Like he has control of the room. And with Norman Osborn,
definitely needs to play the Joker at some point.
It would be amazing. Yeah. But what I love about the dynamic of the Green Goblin is like one of my favorite comic book villains is Two-Face, because in the comics, or at least the broad, there's a lot of interpretations, but like one of the more like broader versions of him that's more like widely accepted is that he has the dual personality, and they really hinted on that in the animated series, where he literally has two sides to him. It's like Gollum and Smeagol. There's two sides of him fighting each other, and the scene where he's looking in the mirror, like talking to himself, all done like for real. And like he looks back at the newspaper that he's holding. That is next level acting. And he did it beautifully. And I feel like that's why, like, I've heard a lot of people make the argument that the Green Goblin is simply Marvel's answer to the Joker, but I think they're completely wrong. Like, I think that he has Joker-like tendencies with like the laugh and and to an extent, he's kind of uncontrollable. Like you don't really know what he's up to. In this movie, he has more of a straightforward plot. Like he's after power. Like, his company was going downhill, and he had to do something for the people who were trying to take it away from him. And then Spider-Man shows up and like fights him, and he's like, well, you can't stop me. And that's where the conflict goes. But I do have to say, like, that dual dynamic of there's the voice inside his head saying you're evil, like you need to be evil to attain more power, that's what you want, and then he still like has that side of him that's like, no, I can't do this. It's that duality that I think makes a good complex villain. We do see it a little bit with Alfred Molina in the next movie, not to hit on that too much, with the arms talking to him, but like with that duality, I think it's one of the best things I've ever seen in a comic book villain.
Well, and it's a great visual way to express it, like whether it's Smeagol at the river or him in the mirror holding the newspaper, like you said. It's like awesome to visually see like that he's fighting with himself, and I don't know, that kind of stuff really works for me. And Willem Dafoe, of course, plays such a good, crazy like villain. It's just awesome. But Austin, what are your thoughts about
off something real quick off of what Henry said about like Green Goblin being Marvel's answer to the Joker, and also what I brought up about him being Spider-Man being Batman and Superman. What the Green Goblin, like the color scheme, the purple, the green, the laughing, the big Joker grin smile, Goblin formula, Joker toxin, like he throws bombs, like Joker uses like explosives and whatnot. Like there's things that are different, like the glider, the goblin aspect of the Green Goblin, that's not, that doesn't really allocate to clowns, but like, that. And then to even go even further on, to touch on Superman, Lex Luthor, what's his color scheme? Purple and green, like yes, it's a counterbalance to like color theory. I think it's like a counterbalance to like red and blue. But like, yeah, that even further go, he is definitely an allusion to the Joker, an homage. He's definitely inspired by him. Same with Carnage as well. But I think Carnage is supposed to be more like the real Marvel toss up to the Joker, because he is just like, he's supposed to be like pure chaos and whatnot. But also same with the Green Goblin too. They're all, a lot of villains are based off the Joker, and it's okay.
Fly, Austin, fly.
Sorry, Austin.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm sitting here wishing I had been the first person to bring up Gollum, because my like intro to this section was going to be, man, William Dafoe played such good Gollum in this movie. The only person who can compare him to Andy Serkis. I love watching the progression of like the Green Goblin persona, like sort of take over Norman Osborn as the movie goes on. I love how, like, in contrast to like Spider-Man, having challenges with his powers and learning how to handle them, we also get that from the villain's perspective, which is a really nice like back and forth where like, our heroes can be flawed, but like, yeah, the villains can be flawed as well. Because when Norman first like regains his consciousness or whatever in his like manor or mansion, whatever it is, where like he has no recollection of the night that happened before when he like injected himself with the whatever power juice that he had. And like, he's like, what? My assistant was murdered? What? The hovercraft was stolen? But then it's like, eventually the Green Goblin, like, it's like that power where like, oh, it's been inside you this whole time cliche kind of comes to the forefront, where, you know, the superhuman energy that was, well, in this case, inserted is like taking over your body. Like, you are no longer Norman Osborn. You are now fully Green Goblin by the end of this movie, you know, and he plays into that whole, again, like Smeagol Gollum persona at the end in like that really intense ending scene, the end fight where, you know, Godspeed Peter Parker, where like he pleads, quote unquote, with Peter Parker, where he's just like, I've always been a father to you, you know, like I've always like respected you, like join me, we could do great things. And but it's just like, I know for a fact that you are completely BSing me at this point, because
what do you think about his final line then? The don't tell Harry.
Oh yeah.
You know, do you think that's Norman coming through back at the very end?
Oh, for sure.
I do.
The facade coming down.
I fully do, and I wish I was more of an emotional human being, because like that's a very intense moment where he's just like, I fucked up, but don't tell my son. You know, like let my son, you know, believe me to be who he believes that I am. It's a really powerful, like almost redemption arc in like the split like 5 seconds that it's in.
Well, he's like to the Green Goblin as like Bruce Wayne is to Batman, where like Batman is a whole other character, and Batman almost is who the character is, and Bruce Wayne is the mask kind of thing. Whereas like in this, it's kind of similar, where it's like, you know, he starts out as Norman Osborn, but then after the experiment goes wrong and everything, the Green Goblin is really who he is, and Norman Osborn is just like this, almost like a skin tag or something on that personality.
And if I may, I just like, since like Lord of the Rings was literally the same year, 2002, the Two Towers was, and then one of like the most iconic scenes from the Two Towers was the scene with Gollum, where he's going back and forth when Frodo and Sam are sleeping in that little like ravine or whatever it is. And like in this, but like in the same year, we got the scene with William Dafoe where like he's essentially doing the same exact Gollum act, but like, instead of doing that back and forth, like cut, it's all one, like into the mirror, and it's just getting more like in your face. You're getting more absorbed in the moment, and more absorbed in Green Goblin.
Yeah, it's a classic Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, just like, let me out, Norman, let me out.
Mm-hmm. I love to see it like fully uncut. And I love knowing, just like a little, like, I know this because of like YouTube, thankfully, that like William Dafoe really campaigned for this character. Like, I don't remember who was originally casted for it, but like it definitely wasn't William Dafoe. Mm-hmm. But like in like a Ryan Reynolds sense, where like he wanted to play the character so bad. And I think this is my opinion. I do think he does give the best performance of this movie, even though, you know, Tobey Maguire does perform as amazing Spider-Man. Just watching that descent is just like, man, it's a really passionate project for William Dafoe, this movie.
Well, it's tremendous writing, it's tremendous direction, and of course Willem bringing it home. And I don't know about you, Rod, but I didn't know Willem Dafoe before this. I didn't watch Platoon when I was 12, and I didn't watch Boondock Saints that early either.
So this is my first exposure to him as well, was Spider-Man. Yeah, definitely. And then after this was Antichrist. I'm kidding, but I know you didn't ask the question, but like I have some things that I want to say. I love Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin. It's just like what people see Jack Nicholson as the Joker is what I see Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin.
It's a classic performance.
It's my favorite performance. He is literally eating the scenery with his shtick, you know, whatever.
His Willem Dafoe-ness.
I will have to say, like, we definitely got to touch on just some of the lines, like even in the rewatch, where there are some classic villain lines that really like that. I don't know, like I don't even know how to describe it, but like for example, when they're at the end of the first fight, because I believe there's like 3 fights between them in this film. At the end of the first fight at the end of the parade, where he's like, "Well, meet again, Spider-Man!" Like,
yeah, and he just like zips off into the distance.
Yeah, like that is
Rocket.
that is classic villainy, and like it makes me think of like we grew up at a time where it's like we had this golden age of these animated TV shows that were basically perfection of comics.
Yeah, outside of the comics, those shows are the gold standard as far as I'm concerned with like the lore and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you had the crossovers of Spider-Man and X-Men, and then they even brought in like Daredevil and Iron Man. Like they brought
Morbius and
yeah, they had them all.
Silver Surfer, Fantastic Four. Yeah. Well, what I wanted to say is that what goes on with Norman Osborn and what leads on with Harry is another perfect example of not telling your home base what's going on and it resulting in more shit getting fucked. Harry or Norman not telling Harry about what's going on makes him sends Harry on a path of vengeance unknowingly against his best friend, and then knowingly against his best friend. And you know, the failure of the butler to relay this information and whatnot would have saved lives, relationships, tension, and time. So you know that nothing, just, you know, you don't need to tell your enemies who you are, but at least tell your home base what's going on, you know.
It's a really interesting point. I hadn't considered it before you started touching on it, but like, so the very last scene where Spider-Man is in their house dropping off Green Goblin and Harry sees him, like if he had only known, but you know, Spider-Man could not tell him that his father was the Green Goblin. He just put a dead body down and it was his dad. And it's just like, if anybody had a conversation.
At that point, if I'm, you know, supposedly how old, 18, 19 years old, and I just got into a super fight with my best friend's dad and whatnot, there would have been a part of me that would have taken the mask off and been like, Henry or you know, Spencer, Henry Austin, I don't know what happened, you know, I didn't realize it was your dad, you know, I'm Spider-Man, I didn't know, you know, like that definitely would have, could have, should have happened.
And not only that, he killed himself, technically.
Another example of this thing happening is was it Batman Forever? Batman Forever, that's the one with Val Kilmer. Robin, you know, he doesn't tell Dick Grayson what he's doing, you know, he just he's curious, he tells him not to go into this door or whatever, just don't go into that door, it's my room or whatever. He gets curious, he's like, I have to go in. He finally breaks in and stumbles into the Batcave and then inserts himself into the violence. So, you know, another example of not telling, you know, your home base what's going on, and then them inserting themselves into the violence, which is what a superhero doesn't want to happen. And then,
I'm glad you touched on Batman Forever, because one of these days I do want to have an episode where I can defend Batman Forever.
Oh yeah, I like Batman Forever. I also like Batman and Robin. It's just, you know, it's just
Chris O'Donnell, man.
When you understand Joel Schumacher, like, it makes more sense, like, about what's going on and why
St. Elmo's Fire,
why things are the way that they are. But one final thing about Green Goblin. This will probably not be the last time I bring up my Superman Batman theory, but Norman Osborn, what is he? A CEO, a powerful CEO of a conglomerate or whatever it is, the Oscorp, LexCorp. He's Lex Luthor. He's the Joker. The Green Goblin
and
is
he's
both
Two-Face.
of them. Well, I mean, like, yeah, you know, he's not really Two-Face in the sense, because Two-Face's thing is not really like the split personality. I mean, yeah, it's the split personality and whatnot, but it's the duality of man. You know, like a lot of things are like that. You know, well, yeah, I mean, the Green Goblin is like that too. But like, Two-Face's thing is more like the flip of the coin, and then the morality of like, you know, or the like his thing is like really duality. Green Goblin kind of touches on duality, but he really is the Joker and Lex Luthor put together. Like it's perfect. And then he becomes the Hulk in like the Ultimate series, because like Green Goblin just becomes like a big flaming Hulk thing. It's ridiculous. But yeah, that's my final things on Norman Osborn. He's great and I love him, and I want Willem Dafoe to be in more things. I want him to be the Joker. Fuck Jared Leto.
All things. Put Willem Dafoe in all things. Austin, what was your favorite scene or set piece in the film? Have at it.
I love just the fight scenes. Not so much the second one. I think the second one took a whole like Matrix approach. And I know that was like the big thing at the time, because like I think Matrix was right before this.
When
like
you said
the whole
second
like
one, are you talking the one at the end or the one where they're in the fiery building?
The fiery building, and like he's throwing all those
right.
razor blades and everything.
Oh,
like it's great cinematography and all, but like it still is my least favorite fight. But like
when he turns around and that scream, like that stock scream goes off,
I love the suit. Henry, I know you said that people were talking smack about like the Green Goblin suit and whatnot, but I just remember like in the Weird Al like Spider-Man like Billy Joel parody. It's like the Piano Man, but it's Spider-Man. He does say like, and Norman's wearing that dumb Power Rangers mask or whatever. And I'm like, oh, come on. I like that mask. Why you got to do me like that, Al?
You know, speaking of just like the costume real quick, I don't think I've really touched on it myself, but like watching this movie, like it's very much like a comic book brought to life. So like, that's why I think like certain parts of it that are campy, like say like the mask, or like, you know, we'll meet again, Spider-Man. Like that's straight ripped out of a comic scene. Mm-hmm. And like, I love like quick cuts within the fights where it's just like, you have like Mary Jane's reaction to everything that's going on. And like, look, it's Spider-Man. Like all these images that you would see in a comic are like brought to film in like brief seconds. Like that's a frame in a comic book to me.
Can I go on a tangent real quick while I'm thinking about it? So in that specific light, like we were talking about like the campiness of this earlier, and it's like, you know, not quite as campy in the Tim Burton kind of way, but do you remember the Ang Lee Hulk movie?
Oh,
they shot it like a comic book. So they had like frames of things being like transported around the screen in the same way like a motion comic book would be. But I was thinking as you were talking just now, this really is shot in like a very comic book way, like comic book on screen moving around, but just without the panels and without like obviously the subtext literally written into the frames. That's a very good call, Austin. Did you have anything else to say about it before I go?
Yeah, you're fine. But like I think when the movie like really cranks to 11 is like the second like he saves that like train car, or that like that elevated car, whatever it is on the bridge.
Train in Chicago, yeah.
The second Green Goblin like throws Peter Parker through that brick wall, like that's when they crank it up to 11. And I think just the performances are so spot on. And like Peter Parker, Spider-Man, he's just getting the piss beat out of him. And, you know, eventually he does the whole superhero cliche where it's like, oh, you threatened my girlfriend. Cool. I'm going to come back and win the day. But like, oh man, I love like personal battles like that. And like, this is where I kind of do like the whole like not telling each other who everyone is, because like in my opinion, that's where the tension really lies. It's like if these people told each other who they were, like none of this would be happening.
But who was he not telling in this particular scenario?
Well, see, here's the thing, like
because it's just Aunt May. I think he just needs to tell Aunt May.
Because
Mary Jane doesn't need to know, just Aunt May.
Norman Osborn knew who he was, though, so they would.
He figured it out on his own. He deduced it. You know, he saw the cut on his arm, and then he saw the blood on the floor, and that's how he figured it out.
But I'm saying that they would still fight.
Let me retract my statement a little bit.
Aunt May
let the man
be aware.
Let the man speak.
Let me retract my statement. I think like from what I've heard,
I'm just trying to keep Aunt May alive, bro.
I think what some people have a problem with is that like all of Spider-Man's villains have like a really close connection to Spider-Man in this trilogy. But like, I think that's where the tension lies, and that's what makes it click and make it work so well. So like maybe not relating it to like tell people who your identity is or anything, but like in that scene, I think that's just where like the tensions and the stakes are so high. And like,
Yeah,
I think this is where Tobey Maguire really sold me in his performance, where it's just these like screams and like these like aches of pain that like every time he takes a hit and he's just screaming in like agony. I'm like, you are really hurting right
desperately
now.
Tries to put the spider web up and Green Goblin just tears through it. Like, what is this shit?
Right. And like I said, in like superhero cliche, like Spider-Man's going to come back and win, sure. But like, oh man, I just like it's like a jaw-dropping fight scene for me. Like, screw all this like CGI bullshit that we get nowadays. Like, I want that in your face, like practical effects, like
you can feel the punches. Like
you really
feel
can.
Everyone.
Like that's why I'm so scared to watch like future Marvel movies, because it's like I know I'm not gonna get this. So it's just
sometimes you'd be surprised. I mean, sometimes. The end of Civil War where, you know, Bucky and Cap are beating the shit out of Iron Man, you feel every hit there. But anyways, Ryan, what do you think? What about favorite set pieces, scenes? What's some of your favorite stuff?
I think my favorite parts to superhero movies are them testing out their powers. So the scene where he's up top, you know, Austin, what's behind you, man? You know, that scene where he's go web, fly, up and away web, Shazam.
Yeah, you know, I love, sorry, not to interrupt, right? I love good like character development in stories, and I love when it doesn't take forever, but like I love when it's entertaining. Character
development?
I do, but I love a good entertaining
I also
scene.
love water. I'm kidding.
You're good. It's an entertaining scene though.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like that's why it's my favorite of like the superhero, like of the superhero scenes that you see this in. It's like in other movies, there's like the testing of the powers, like Green Lantern, Shazam, you know, Batman, like the Batman Begins, there's like a little bit of that where he's like, he's not in the full bat costume, you know, he's wearing like a black balaclava and he's like testing out his like, you know, earpieces and whatnot, and
an homage to the Mask of the Phantasm scene where he has the black mask and he goes after Osborn,
right,
Oldman, Gary Oldman,
right. And like I love that, the making of the suit, you know, that part. So it's like, you know, and just that alone, and then him swinging and then hitting the billboard and just totally wrecking himself. It's classic. It's classic. You know,
I love it. Yeah. I love it so much.
Then, to go off of that, my favorite scene in the second one, which I know we haven't done an episode, but flash forward to the future episode where we do Spider-Man 2, where I'm saying what my favorite scene is. It's where he's running on the rooftops and jumping, and then he jumps and he doesn't quite make it and he falls and he's like, I'm back, my back. It's classic.
Yeah, I do love real quick like how they don't give him like 100% like full control of his powers yet. Like right after Uncle Ben is killed, and like you see him like slowly climbing up the walls, and like he's still kind of fumbling around with like his swinging and his jumping from like car to car. It's like, I love how you're just like not total badass level yet. Like you're still figuring it out. So
yeah, I love that. I love that stuff. It humanizes the characters. It makes them relate to it more. An Iron Man, when he's in the silver suit and he's like, you know, testing out like how to fly, or before he's even built like the suit, he's just built the boots and he's like, all right, test number 2, and then he just and then flies into the wall behind him, and you know, it's comedy gold. You know, those scenes are so endearing, you know. So yeah, that's my answer.
Awesome. Henry.
I just want to piggyback off of what Ryan just said, because like it just makes me think of my favorite film, The Mask of Zorro, where Anthony Hopkins is teaching Antonio Banderas to be the new Zorro, and I think that just goes into what a great origin film of any hero, even if that's like realistic hero. This is a superhero.
Is that the one where he's got to like do the thing like under like the drip of water, or is that Count of Monte Cristo?
That's Count of Monte Cristo. Another great movie. But yeah, like those training scenes, like, I mean, I'm right there with you. Like, I think year one training scenes and the origin is all an important part. As far as this movie goes, in terms of a favorite scene, like I could literally pinpoint a lot of them, many of which would be just Willem Dafoe delivering his dialogue, whether it's like "Hello, my dear," or like, and if now that you've really pissed me
the
off.
goblin voice, it's iconic, man.
It is. It's so
now
good.
Choose.
But I do have to say, my favorite scene in this film, which I don't think gets enough attention for just being a great scene, is where like he just randomly, like, you know, he shows up to support. I know like it could be misconstrued as kind of creepy, but where he's Mary Jane gets out of her audition or whatever it was, and he's just like, oh hey, and then the guys follow her up the alleyway, and he shows up without the mask, and no one sees him because he's beating the crap out of them so fast. He beats all of them down. Then he kind of turns around, and she's like, wait, who are you? And like he just goes up the alley, he disappears and comes down upside down. And then of course there's the epic upside down kiss scene, because like that is just so, like, it's one of my favorite movie kisses of all time. And I think just like,
this movie's so iconic. I keep saying it, but yeah, it is. Yeah.
It just set a new standard for what I think a romance in a superhero movie could be, because you'd had like, there was the Lois Lane and like the Christopher Reeves Superman movies, which I mean,
flying together. Yeah.
Like, and it was magical. It really was. But it's just like, you know, the chemistry of a movie like that, like, you know, granted that was the 70s, and like since then, like at least our generation, we don't like had the Batman movies where he had a different girl every single movie. And then like I can't really think of too many other superhero movies around the time where it's like you have this very like driving, like very much to be taken seriously like relationship that also drives Peter, because in a way, like not just Ben and Aunt May, but like Mary Jane's also inspiring him to be better. Like he sees the kind of bullshit she has to deal with, so he wants to be better for her too. So I don't know, that whole alleyway scene of him kicking the crap out of the criminals, like that is Spider-Man.
Yeah, I love that one. That's like, yeah, like his first real well, no, I mean he had kind of been Spider-Maning for like a hot second, right? At that particular point, because he's already in the suit.
This is post parade.
Right. Okay. Right. So I think that scene is, so I don't know if like you've seen like the Spider-Man like featurette or whatever, but there's like, they talk about how like Tobey Maguire's audition for Spider-Man, he wore like a, I think it's like a spandex like pants or whatever, and like was like bouncing around on stage like fighting like stuntmen and whatnot. And I think this is that scene, because he's doing it without like, you know, the mask on and whatnot. And from what I remember, I think some of the choreography is really similar in terms of what they're doing. At least the subject matter is him coming in to defend Mary Jane from attackers, and that's like the closest scene I think that we have to that, because I don't know if she actually gets accosted by other ne'er-do-wells besides the Green Goblin after that.
And I also think like that first jump he does after he pulls them off of her, where he does like I think it's like a 920 backflip, like,
oh yeah, forward. Dude, it's ridiculous.
Anyways, yeah, I mean, this is a great movie. I'm so glad we had time to talk about it and everything. We're going to have to talk more about this movie, because I don't think we were able to get to everything. Fortunately, we got a few time constraints, so I'm going to have to wrap us early. But thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. This was a really fantastic conversation, and I can't wait to see what other opinions we can kind of touch on once we come back.
Sponsored by Trader Joe's Oyster Crackers.
Hey, shout out. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Ryan, for being with us. It was such a fun time. I hope you guys had fun. Remember to be excellent to each other. We'll catch you next time.
And party on, dudes.